was standing in the kitchen, still holding the dish towel warm from drying plates, when her daughter Melanie looked at her and said it flat, unapologetic. "You won't co-sign Noah's car loan? Then don't expect to stay here for long." No yelling, no tantrum, just that sharp tone, spatula in hand, as if she were discussing the weather. Elaine didn't reply. At her age, she'd learned that some things didn't need to be answered out loud, especially not to people who had already decided what they believed about you. Noah, her grandson, had left the room just moments before, his sneakers squeaking against the laminate floor, his voice still echoing from earlier. "It's just a formality, Grandma. I have a job. I'm not asking for money." But Elaine knew better. She had seen those bank documents before, sat in that office, listened to that calm voice tell her, explain what it meant to sign your name beneath someone else's dream. Melanie went back to scrubbing the pan, her irritation loud in every movement. "We rearranged everything for you, remember? After your surgery. That back room could have been my office." Elaine said nothing. Because yes, she remembered. She remembered the gratitude. She remembered thinking she was lucky to be taken in. But in that moment, standing there in a house she helped fund years ago, paying for braces, for rent when Melanie's husband left, Elaine realized something had shifted. She was no longer being helped, she was being held. And the moment she refused to play along, the lights began to go out. Literally. That night, only her bedroom went dark. The rest of the house glowed like nothing had changed. But Elaine knew. The darkness wasn't an accident. It was a message. One they didn't have the courage to speak out loud. The next morning, Elaine didn't bring up the light. She walked into the kitchen, her steps slow but steady. Noah was already gone, and Melanie stood by the counter, scrolling on her phone with one earbud in. The smell of coffee filled the air, familiar but oddly distant. Elaine said, "Good morning." Melanie nodded, didn't look up. Elaine reached for her teacup, filled the kettle, and stood in silence beside her daughter. The kind of silence that wraps around your shoulders like a wet blanket, heavy, unwelcome. "My light didn't work last night," she said softly. Not accusing, just stating. Melanie shrugged. Maybe something tripped. "Everything else was fine." Another shrug. "Then, you'll have to ask Noah. He was fiddling with the breakers the other day." Elaine didn't ask. She didn't push. She knew how that would go. If she said too much, she'd become the problem. The one disturbing the peace. The one too sensitive to live with. So she let it go. But later that afternoon, she checked the breaker box herself. Everything was in place. Every switch. Every label. Nothing was wrong. Except the part where someone wanted her to feel out of place. The next night, it was the outlet. Her heating pad wouldn't work. She tried 3 different plugs in her room dead, but when she carried it out to the hallway, it turned on just fine. It was subtle, a slow fade, not a confrontation. No one shouted. No one kicked her out. They just started removing comfort, one small piece at a time. The message was clear, even if no one said it out loud. You're no longer needed, you're merely tolerated. Elaine started to shrink herself. She breathed quieter, stepped lighter, made herself small so no one would have to trip over her existence. She answered Noah's lazy greetings with polite nods. She folded laundry, fed the cat, washed her own dishes. At night she sat in her room dim, cold and quiet, wondering how long it would take for her to disappear completely. And as she stared out the window into the cul-de-sac where porch lights shone warmly from other homes, one thought began to form. Quiet, but steady. You don't have to stay. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But out of truth. She didn't belong here anymore. And maybe that was okay. Elaine had said yes so many times before. She said yes when Melanie needed help paying rent after her divorce. She said yes when Noah's braces weren't covered by insurance. She said yes to rides, to babysitting, to filling the freezer before holidays. She didn't regret it, not really. But this co-signing a car loan for a 20-year-old who couldn't keep his checking account balanced, this felt different. It wasn't help, it was risk. And she'd spent a lifetime managing risk, raising a child alone after Derek died, working nights as a receptionist to keep a roof over their heads. She knew what it meant to stretch a dollar, to feel the ground shift when security was threatened. Noah didn't understand that yet. Melanie perhaps had forgotten. When she said no, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain herself with long speeches. She simply said, "I'm sorry, I can't." And everything changed. Noah barely spoke to her after that. Melanie stopped making small talk, stopped asking if she wanted anything from the store. Meals became quiet, mechanical. The kindness faded. And then came the darkness. Elaine spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, the lamp by her bedside still lifeless. Her hip ached, but the heating pad wouldn't work in any of the outlets. She bundled herself in an extra blanket and told herself it was temporary. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't just about a loan. It was about control. She had stepped out of the role they were comfortable keeping her in, the giver, the helper, the quiet shadow in the corner, and now, they didn't know what to do with her. They resented her boundaries. And so they withdrew. No shouting, no slam doors. Just space that grew colder by the day. Elaine realized that sometimes saying no doesn't provoke a battle. It invites erasure. But that erasure, it was a gift in disguise. It allowed her to see the truth of the arrangement not as family, but as transaction. And once she saw it clearly, she stopped waiting for warmth from people who had already stepped away. She needed to stop trying to fit into a house that only made room for her when she was useful. She needed to stop being grateful for crumbs. She needed to choose herself. The decision didn't come with drama. Elaine didn't slam doors or announce her plans at the dinner table. There were no ultimatums or guilt-ridden speeches. It was quiet like most of her choices had been. But this time, the quiet was hers. She began with a simple question: what do I have? The answer wasn't much. A modest pension, a small savings account she'd kept since Derek passed, and a tiny emergency fund they'd once called just in case. This was the case. She didn't tell Melanie. Didn't drop hints. Instead, she walked to the library on a Wednesday afternoon, sat at a public computer near the window, and searched senior-friendly rentals, no stairs, utilities included, under $1,000. Most were worn down or miles away from anything familiar. But one stood out, a small one-bedroom on Rosewood Avenue. Clean, bright, a shared garden, managed by a local woman named Karen Meyer. Elaine printed the listing and folded it neatly into her purse like a sacred thing. The next morning, while the house was quiet, she dialed the number. "Hi, this is Karen," a warm voice answered. Elaine's own voice wavered slightly. "Is the unit on Rosewood still available?" "It is," Karen said, cheerful. "Would you like to come see it? Monday morning works best." Elaine smiled, even though no one could see. "Yes, Monday is perfect." That night, she slept. Not well, not long, but with ease she hadn't felt in weeks. The weight in her chest lightened just enough to let her breathe fully. She had a plan. A way forward. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was air. For the next few days, Elaine played the part of the helpful grandmother. She folded towels, refilled the bird feeder, answered Melanie's clipped sentences with calm nods. But inside, she was preparing. She began sorting through drawers when no one was home, starting with the dresser Melanie once promised to replace but never did. Beneath scarves and a sewing kit, she found a file folder, Derek's death certificate, the deed to their first house, a few faded photographs, and a small cream-colored envelope marked for later. Derek's handwriting. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She just held it in her hand for a while. Then, slowly, she set it aside and opened the closet. One coat, 2 good dresses, a pair of slippers. It wouldn't take many boxes. She wasn't packing a life of possessions. She was packing a future. One she would choose. Elaine stood in front of her closet, eyeing every item like it asked for permission to stay. She'd always been practical, never one for clutter or sentimentality, but this was different. This wasn't spring cleaning. This was departure, deliberate, quiet, freeing. The first box held her photo albums, carefully stacked with tissue paper between the covers. Memories she didn't want to leave behind, even if the people in them had. She added the small keepsake box Derek had given her on their 20th anniversary. Inside was her wedding ring, a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, and a small ceramic bird she'd once kept by the windowsill. The second box was filled with the things no one ever noticed she used: her sewing kit, crossword books, the brown cardigan she wore on chilly evenings, a scarf that still carried the faint scent of lavender from a drawer sachet. Box 3: kitchen items: a chipped porcelain mug Derek bought at a flea market, a jar of strawberry preserves, her favorite wooden spoon, nothing fancy, just familiar. The fourth box was still empty. She'd save it for last: the nightgown she wore to sleep, the throw blanket she crocheted during chemo, the tin of buttons that once belonged to her mother. She sat down, breath steady, hands calm. It was strange how small her life looked once folded, but it wasn't sad. It was honest. Everything she packed mattered to her, nothing else had to. That evening, as she watered the small potted plant by her window, she overheard Melanie on the phone. The tone was clipped, defensive. "She's been acting strange," Melanie said, "like she's planning something but won't say what. You know how she gets." A pause, likely Noah on the other end. "No, I didn't ask again about the loan. What's the point?" Elaine listened from behind the curtain, not out of spite, but out of confirmation. They weren't curious about where she was going, only that she was no longer where they expected her to be. She smiled gently, almost to herself. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was simply ready. And that was more than enough. Monday morning arrived with a clear sky and a sense of purpose. Elaine wore her good shoes, the navy pair with low heels, and tied her hair back with a simple clip. She didn't dress up for anyone. She dressed up for herself, for the woman making her own choices again. Karen met her at the entrance of the little complex on Rosewood Avenue. She was warm, approachable, with kind eyes and a clipboard tucked under one arm. The apartment was smaller than Elaine expected: a narrow galley kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. The living room had one window facing a shared garden. But it was clean, bright, quiet. And most importantly, it was hers if she wanted it. "This is our last available unit," Karen explained. "Most of the residents are women. Widows, mostly. It's quiet, safe. The landlord lives next door." Elaine ran her hand along the windowsill. Sunlight touched her skin. No shadows. No cold draft. No broken lamp left unfixed. "It's peaceful," she whispered. She filled out the application right there. Karen handed her a pamphlet about the garden. "You're welcome to plant something if you'd like," she said. "Most of the women do. Tomatoes, herbs, flowers." Elaine smiled. "Maybe lavender." When she returned to Melanie's house that afternoon, no one noticed she'd been gone. Noah was in the garage, muttering at a stubborn car battery. Melanie was on a work call upstairs. Elaine walked back to her room, slipped the lease packet into her drawer, and sat on the bed. Something had shifted. Not in them. In her. She wasn't waiting to be noticed anymore. She wasn't hoping for the kindness that had long since drained away. She was preparing to leave. Not with resentment. Not with bitterness. But with a quiet certainty that filled the space where permission used to be. Later that evening, while chopping onions for dinner, Melanie hovered nearby, sipping wine. "You know," she said, too casually, "I talked to Noah. He's still really upset." Elaine kept chopping. "He feels rejected," Melanie added, "like you didn't even try to help." Elaine set the knife down gently. "I didn't reject him. I protected myself." Melanie rolled her eyes. "He's family." Elaine turned, voice calm and measured. "And is that what family means now? Turning off lights when someone says no?" Melanie didn't answer. She picked up her wine and left the room. And Elaine. She didn't chase after her. She didn't explain. She just stirred the pot quietly and tasted the soup. It needed nothing. 2 days later, Elaine made an appointment with her lawyer. Francine Myers had handled her affairs ever since Derek passed. She was sharp, direct, and respected boundaries, a quality Elaine now deeply valued. When Elaine walked into the office that morning, Francine raised an eyebrow with a smile. I was wondering when you'd show up. I need to make some changes, Elaine said, sliding into the seat across from her. I've moved. Francine nodded. I figured something was happening. Melanie left a message last night. Sounded rattled. She's more surprised than concerned, Elaine replied softly. Francine reached for a folder. What are we changing? Elaine took a breath. I want to remove Melanie as my primary beneficiary. There was no malice in her voice, no bitterness, just a quiet, tired resolve. She doesn't see me as a person anymore, Elaine continued. She sees me as a resource. And I don't want what I've saved to become another thing she feels entitled to. Francine didn't argue, she simply nodded. Where would you like it to go? Elaine smiled slightly. There's a local scholarship fund. For women over 40 who want to return to school. She paused. I was one of them once. I went back to finish my degree after Derek died. Only got through 1 year before Dad got sick and needed care. I always wondered what would have happened if I'd finished. Francine scribbled a note. Let's make it count for someone else then. Elaine also requested a small monthly trust be set aside for Noah, but with conditions it would only activate after his 25th birthday, and only if he completed some form of education or training. It wasn't punishment. It was a chance. A boundary that doubled as a gift. And lastly, she asked that her modest belongings, her books, her quilts, her jewelry be donated to a local shelter for women starting over. When the paperwork was ready, Francine slid it across the desk. Still sure? Elaine signed her name without hesitation. Completely. Francine studied her. You look lighter. Elaine nodded. Because I am. As she left the office, she stopped at the corner florist and picked up a single daffodil. Yellow, the color of beginnings. She carried it home in one hand, her lease in the other. And when she placed the flower in a jar by Derek's photo, she whispered softly. Not bad for a fresh start. Then she turned on the radio and let the music fill the room like sunlight after a storm. Elaine didn't move out to make a statement. She moved out to breathe. And in the weeks that followed, she built something quietly powerful: routine, choice, peace. She joined the Wednesday tea circle in the garden. Just 4 women, all over 60, all carrying silent stories behind gentle smiles. No one asked why Elaine had moved. They just made space, passed her the sugar bowl, and let her pour her tea. Rita, her neighbor from apartment 2A, brought over lilac cuttings and helped Elaine plant them under the kitchen window. It'll take root quickly, Rita said. Might even bloom by next spring. Elaine didn't answer. She just placed her hands into the soil and pressed it down. It felt good to plant something that would grow without asking for permission. Noah came to visit again. He didn't come with demands, only with a quiet knock and a gift, a letter, handwritten, folded neatly in an envelope. Dear Grandma. Every time I check my bank account now, I think of you. Thank you for saying no when I wasn't ready to hear it. I'm starting to understand. Love. Noah. Elaine kept that letter in the same drawer where Derek's final note lived. Different kinds of love. Both earned. Melanie called sometimes. The conversations were careful. She didn't ask Elaine to come back. She knew better. They spoke of weather, of Noah's job, of the cat she rescued last fall. It was not closeness, but it was something honest, something beginning again. One quiet Sunday, Elaine sat on her porch as Billie Holiday hummed softly from her radio. The birds danced in the hedges, and the scent of rosemary drifted through the air. She let herself cry. Not the deep, aching sobs of loss, just the quiet weeping of a woman who had finally laid something down. She wasn't grieving what she left. She was releasing what had held her back. And she knew now what she hadn't known for so many years. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not too old to begin again. You are not required to stay where love feels like a transaction. She'd spent too many years being grateful for space in other people's homes. Now she had her own. And when the wind picked up and the little chime outside her window sang its soft tune, Elaine smiled. This wasn't a retreat. It was a remembering. Of who she was. Of what she deserved. of the life she could still shape with her own hands. If this story reached you, share it with someone. A sister. A mother. A friend. Because someone else needs to hear it too. It's not too late. And your peace? It's not a luxury,